Look at the screen. Look at the gameplay. If you are anything like I was, you would think that you're looking at a janky, unpublished, PS1 era looking physics-based hockey game that was probably made in less than a week and forgotten to the endless chasm of time. If you thought this, you would be correct on all accounts except for one. What if I told you that this game has had over a decade of competitive play? What if I told you that this game has fucking tech? What if I told you that that was all barely scratching the surface? Because you see, this video is not about hockey. This video isn't even strictly about video games. This video is about a community and a story about what happens when a few people fall in love with a game that was never meant to be loved in the first place.
Oh, nice redirects in front, Quackyface.
He was like, it's a tech demo, leave me the hell alone.
Not a bad stick, big save, hey Bert.
We've never had developer support.
Got room, he shoots, and what a save again, myself plug.
He hated it. Like, he wanted nothing to do with the game.
This is the story of a game called HockeyQuestionMark, a game you've likely never heard of before. As I said, this video is not just about the game itself, but also about its story. And I want to tell you this story chronologically as I learned about it, so that you can get the same perspective that I had of a curious outsider slowly peeling back the layers on a game that's hiding a lot more than it shows on the surface. Let's start with how I found the game. Back in high school, my friend and I would do this thing every time we got bored in class. We'd trade laptops and completely nuke each other's computers with the gnarliest malware we could possibly find. I'm talking Bonzi Buddy levels of internet garbage. During one of these great battles, my friend brings up a game on my laptop titled Hockey? Or HockeyQuestionMark. He found it off a random website that he got via another random Reddit thread. This game was not advertised to him at all, he came upon it essentially by coincidence. So he boots it up and I watch him play for a bit. It looked like a super straightforward physics-based hockey game with the quirk of having mouse movement to control your hockey stick. It was definitely neat, but it immediately looked to me like some small personal project that someone uploaded just for the hell of it. Just as I was ready to dismiss it though, we see a join menu. We look at each other. No way a game this small has any active servers, right? So we click it. Several lobbies pop up, some actually showing active players. So we join a lobby with some numbers in it, and real people were currently playing HockeyQuestionMark. We were shocked, so we immediately start talking to them. Hey, do you guys actually play this game? They say yeah. We start getting excited, thinking that we stumbled across 4 or 5 weirdos who are into this random jank-ass hockey game, but then they link us a Discord. So I bring my mouse to the link, and that's when class ended. I had to run, so I got up and left, never coming back to the game or the Discord, never even giving it a second thought. My friend, on the other hand, stays a while, and decides to see how deep the rabbit hole goes. Fast forward to a few months ago, and I'm deep in thought as to what my next masterpiece video will be. That same friend from before reaches out to me and says that a video on HockeyQuestionMark could be a great idea. I show a bit of skepticism because back then it didn't seem like the game had much going for it, but that's when he links me the Discord again. And this time, I click it. This Discord revealed a genuine, passionate, thriving competitive community of HockeyQuestionMark players that have not only been playing this game for just about a decade now, but have clearly gone above and beyond the scope that this game was ever meant to reach. Now, admittedly, it was not a large player base, maybe about 130 people or so when I first joined, but regardless, this was a fully fledged competitive gaming community. Players that were skilled, that discovered tech, that competed with each other in organized tournament-style leagues frequently. I was both inspired and dumbfounded that a game that came from a website that I was certain was going to give me malware, a game that looked like this, was in fact hiding a prosperous gaming community. I honestly couldn't believe it. All I knew is that I wanted to learn more because I knew there had to be a story as to how this all even exists. I barely knew where to begin, so I just messaged their general chat, "Hey, I want to make a video on this game, who's up for an interview?" And within a single day, a bunch of people reached out to me to talk about their experiences. The HockeyQuestionMark community was incredibly friendly and welcoming. Every single person I talked to, including the people I interviewed, were so excited to have someone talk about this small unknown game that they were so passionate about. It was really endearing, and I could immediately tell that there was a genuine love for this game. The 4 people I got to interview were the following. Dialoriax, or Dial, a top player who's been around for 8.5 years, who's frequently placed super highly across his competitive career, holds the record for the most points and goals across all seasons, and is the game's primary community manager. Sully, a goalie who's been around for 6 years, with another impressive competitive history, 2nd place record for percent of shots saved, and some really neat insights on the game and its community. Kapanen, another top player with a super impressive competitive history, 2nd highest assists across all seasons, and manages the community and Discord. And finally, Winters, someone who's been here since the very beginning of the game's creation, has casted a ton of the competitive games, and personally knows the game's creator. Actually, why don't we talk about the creator of HQM for a brief moment, because he is easily one of the most fascinating parts of this story, and at this point in the story, here is what I knew about him. Alex Austin, or CrypticSea as he's known online, is an indie game developer from California, who's mostly known for the creation of the game SubRosa, a physics-based MMO shooter that's been quite well received on Steam and is even published by Devolver Digital, a big-name game publishing company. Prior to SubRosa, however, Alex worked on several small personal projects, one of which was HockeyQuestionMark. On his website, you can see all of these prior projects. I played through a couple of them. There are some really interesting game ideas here. It immediately became clear to me that Alex Austin was a talented game developer, but it is at this point that the first peculiarity occurs. HockeyQuestionMark is nowhere to be seen on Alex's website, despite the website essentially being his portfolio. A game that's been active for 10 years, with a community that, while small, is clearly still engaging with the game daily, and it's not even mentioned once. In fact, even on his Twitter, he lists every game he's worked on, but no mention of HQM. And it wasn't like it was because the game wasn't up to a certain standard or anything. Alex had much smaller scale projects uploaded to his site, but for some reason, no HockeyQuestionMark. At that point though, I really had no reason to question any of it, and besides, I was a lot more concerned with the players and their stories, because they're awesome and they deserve to be talked about. I had a mountain of questions for these interviews. I wanted to know why people played this game, how it all started, what professional HockeyQuestionMark gameplay even looked like. After all, why would anyone dedicate nearly a decade of their life to a game so small? Luckily, the folks over at the Discord were more than happy to answer. My first interview was with Dial, who gave me some insight onto how the community came to be.
When I said the North American community started, what really happened is there was a league called the HockeyQuestionMark League, HQML, that was put together by a handful of people that had found the game through some website that had some forums on it, and a couple people found this game through there, knowing some of the other stuff that CrypticSea, the developer, had worked on. So they wanted to start up this like for fun league thing where you put together some teams of your friends and just played some scheduled games against each other every Friday night.
Dial joined the community back in 2013 when the game first started being advertised to the public. And I'm not talking advertisements like some Raid Shadow Legends type shit. No, it was a literal Reddit post on r/hockey linking people to another small community on the Facepunch forums.
And I got here from a Reddit thread on r/hockey actually. It was like, hey, looking for something to do, come play this first person game.
The people who were there on the forum originally were either people who knew about Alex Austin's work already, or people who knew him personally. It was almost purely word of mouth that got this community started. So Dial, along with a bunch of other players, started playing the game around then. Since the community started growing, a player named Taser began putting together some more competitive leagues, and Dial soon became one of the game's managers.
And at that point, there were too many people for the HQML, and the HQML was meant to be a little bit more for fun. So another person in the community who goes by the name Taser usually decided to start up a competitive league called the LHL, or the Legends Hockey League.
On the HockeyQuestionMark timeline, this was, as the community calls it, the game's very first recruitment wave. Recruitment was a term they used a lot, which at first kind of confused me because you don't generally regard people joining a gaming community as recruitment, But at the same time, it kinda made sense. This game is not advertised. The game's own creator doesn't even have it up on his website. If you want to find this game, you have to come upon it by chance like Dial did. And if you want to play this game, your two options for downloading it are to find it on this random website, which doesn't even give you the updated version of the game, or you can get the proper version through their subreddit, which is a link to a Google Drive of a fan-made community version that the community plays on. Once again, pretty strange, but I still had no reason to question any of it quite yet. The point is, these guys really did not have many tools to bring people into playing this game, and for that reason, I imagine every new member for the community is incredibly valuable to them, because there's just so little out there telling people that this game exists. Another reason they call it recruitment, though, is because many of the people that check out the game stay. I mean, a game this small, keeping hundreds of players interested for nearly a decade, that has to be something special. And so I asked a bunch of the players what made them love the game so much, and that's when they broke down HQM for me. HockeyQuestionMark is a fully physics-based game. There are no animations. You are in control of the physical objects that are your player and their hockey stick. Across every single person I interviewed, this was the part of the game that they highlighted as their favorite. The fact that the player is always in control.
The fact that you just have full control over everything you do in this is what stuck out to me and what's basically kept me around.
Like, every time something bad happens in this game, I can just say, I could have just played better. Like, there's a lot of games that you really can't say that. You genuinely can blame the game, but this game, you can't do that.
Now, I don't know if I'll make the HQM players a little upset by saying this, but my mind immediately started drawing comparisons to Rocket League, another entirely physics-based sports game. Rocket League's skill ceiling is ridiculously high because there's almost nothing inhibiting your freedom of movement. The allure for HockeyQuestionMark is very much the same. You can do crazy stuff in this game, and your skill level is entirely dependent on how much you're willing to understand, manipulate, and sometimes even exploit the game's physics engine. And just like Rocket League, the game's initial difficulty curve can be pretty intense. But with enough practice, this game really does allow for an insane amount of skill expression.
We got people that can, skate down the ice and pick up the puck on their stick and just skate around with the puck floating in the air on their stick like that. I mean,
exploiting a video game's systems has been the catalyst for competitive opportunity in a ton of video games. Think Super Smash Bros. Melee, where nearly all the tech is based on some sort of bug manipulation. HockeyQuestionMark is no different. This game is janky, but in true competitive gaming fashion, the community dug through the exploits to find a bunch of tech to optimize movement, turning speeds, stick control, and so on. Here's a showcase of only some of the tech that the community has found so far. First, we have the lookup turn. By holding right-click, you're able to freely look around 360 degrees instead of controlling your hockey stick. By looking straight up, you're able to make bigger turns a lot faster because of the way that it bends your character model. It also looks like this. Then we've got a handful of tech that has to do with pressing Control to enter the player into ragdoll mode. At first glance, ragdolling looks like it does pretty much nothing, but it actually opens up a whole lot of opportunity. Tapping it during short turns is called control sliding and is optimal for movement because it conserves more momentum. If you enter ragdoll mode and then spam the jump button at the right time, you pull off a macro jump, launching you into the air, letting you do crazy stuff like soar over players, block airborne shots, and more. If you're ragdolling, you're also able to bounce yourself off the sideboards using your hockey stick, and this is all only a fraction of the insane amount of depth that the HockeyQuestionMark community has drawn out of this game. And there are still discoveries being made, new tech being found, even after all this time. But the game isn't without flaws. There are still a fair amount of disruptive bugs that have been hindering the game for quite some time. And when Dial told me about this, I felt inclined to ask, are there any updates planned for the game, anytime soon?
basically we've had a pretty tenuous relationship with him at best.
He was like, you guys like this game, I don't.
Unsure of what to do and how to make it work.
It sounds like he doesn't want the game to exist.
Yeah.
He blames the whole hockey community.
This is when we start getting into a much more complicated side to this game's history. HockeyQuestionMark is an unloved gem. A neglected child, an abandoned project caught in the crossfires of one of the messiest developer fanbase relationships I have ever seen. For about 6 of the 10 years that this game has existed, it has done so not only completely absent from its creator, but at some points even at his mercy. Now, I know that sounds pretty dramatic, so what am I talking about? Well, to answer that, we have to go back to Alex Austin / CrypticSea, the creator of HockeyQuestionMark. First, let's talk about Alex Austin's disinterest for the game itself. As mentioned earlier, SubRosa is Alex's main game, his passion project, and it's the one that got Devolver Digital interested in sponsoring him in the first place. This was the project that Alex cared about, and it's the game that he had been working on for several years. During these years, he'd make shorter games that essentially behaved as tech demos for his custom physics engine that he would go on to apply to SubRosa. And HockeyQuestionMark is one of those games. But not only that, in my interview with Dial, he revealed to me that HockeyQuestionMark was made during a game jam.
He was doing some kind of competition, which I forget exactly what it was now.
Like a game jam or something?
Yeah, you had to put together a game in like a week.
HockeyQuestionMark, a game that's had hundreds of dedicated fans for over a decade now, was spectacularly made in less than a week, all the way back in 2010. As part of some competition. It was never intended to reach the popularity that it did. Cryptic just wasn't passionate for it the same way his players were. Furthermore, CrypticSea is a full-time game developer, meaning he likely depends on the success of his projects for his income. Devolver Digital is helping fund his work, but they probably wanted Alex focusing on his first-person multiplayer shooter that they were actually publishing, rather than a free hockey game that only a couple hundred people fell in love with. But even so, he would still infrequently update the game from 2010 to 2014. Never as involved as the players wanted him to be, but hey, anything's better than nothing, right? Now, you're probably thinking the same thing I thought when I first heard this information. Why doesn't Alex just sell the game to someone else, give away the source code for this outdated, janky hockey game to someone who actually cares for it? And that brings us to the second reason. Patch 0.59 was a big deal for HockeyQuestionMark. Back in 2014, Alex Austin, after barely updating the game for a whole year, finally came out with some news. And for the first time, he seemed excited about it. Something big was coming to HQM. A new prototype is coming for true believers only. This is what Cryptic told the HockeyQuestionMark community in the lead up to patch 0.59. This patch was going to be something big, something the community had been yearning for. They'd been neglected for so long, and finally, the game was receiving attention. Alex, to help fund development, offered to release an early version of the patch to people who donated $8, something that many in the community were more than happy to do. Overall, it was looking like Alex was taking the patch seriously, and hopes were at an all-time high. And then it released.
Always keep your stick on the eyes.
This is so freaking fun.
Shoot it. I'll get the tip.
This is the best part of the game.
Oh my god.
Oh god.
Are you gonna
I'm smashing you with my stick.
No. He's riding you.
Oh, what a blog.
You gotta do it at 30.
Now, I am not a professional HockeyQuestionMark player. In fact, I am not even a decent HockeyQuestionMark player, so I cannot personally tell you whether this patch was good or not. But what I can tell you is the opinions of over 7 separate top players that I interviewed in this game of only a few hundred. Patch 0.59 used a completely different physics engine, deeply changing a lot of how the game's movement felt, how the hockey stick controlled, how the game looked. Players were moving way slower, and stick control was almost completely different. Now, did this make the game a lot funnier? Yes, but was it actually healthy for the game? Well, unfortunately, no. In Dial's own words, the core mechanics of the game had changed, and the community started showing concern. It didn't take long for the community to start freaking out as they realized that patch 0.59 was not faithful to the fundamental gameplay mechanics that the game had been built upon prior. In fact, I can barely even find footage of gameplay on this version because the community dropped it so fast. Not to mention that the version doesn't exist anywhere anymore, not even on the HockeyQuestionMark Reddit. If you're updating a game for hundreds of thousands, no, even just thousands of players, their opinions are going to be an ocean of noise, and gauging that noise is nearly impossible. You will always have haters, you will always have people who complain. There truly is no pleasing everyone. HockeyQuestionMark, however, is only a couple hundred players, and their opinions were clear as crystal. Unanimously, the community had agreed that this update is not the direction that the game should take. Criticism is a fragile subject to approach, especially in gaming communities. It can quickly turn volatile, both towards the developer and the players. And unfortunately, that is exactly what happened.
So we gave a lot of constructive feedback to him that was like, hey, here are all the issues we have with this. And he basically looked at it as we were being entitled. And his response led to a number of our people having immature responses back. And that kind of went back and forth and effectively led to a complete lack of communication between the developer and the community.
Animosity grew between Alex and the players. Alex told the community they were entitled and ungrateful. The community told Alex he was egotistical and stubborn. So how did we get here? How was this patch so off base of what the community wanted? Well, the answer is SubRosa. Alex didn't want to update HockeyQuestionMark's engine for the reasons previously stated. He just didn't have a passion for the game. Instead, for patch 0.59, he used an alternate version of SubRosa's physics engine, the game he was actually working on, but unfortunately, it just didn't mesh with the game the way he had hoped. The community, after learning this, felt betrayed, felt like Alex didn't care about their game at all. Alex, however, refused to go back on the update. The finishing blow was when a player publicly demanded on Twitter that Alex refunds his $8 donation as one of the early supporters, saying that Alex didn't follow up on the promises he gave the community, ignored their feedback, and recklessly changed the game. Important side note though, the majority of folks I talked to didn't want stuff like this happening. They didn't want people antagonizing or flaming CrypticSea because they wanted a healthy developer-player relationship. Unfortunately though, as so frequently happens in gaming communities, the toxic voices end up being the loudest, and the damage was already done. This was the event that drew the wedge between Alex and the HockeyQuestionMark community. From this point forward, every interaction was walking on ice. The resentment never left, for both the players and Alex. As an outsider to this conflict, I didn't really know where to stand on all of it. On the one hand, it's easy to look at all of what I just said and assume it's a typical case of a gaming community being toxic and ungrateful to their developer. And while I'm sure that is partially the case, there is important context to keep in mind. Alex, prior to even releasing the patch, had already made it very clear that he didn't care for the game. In my interviews, I learned about just how much the community was doing. Volunteer managers paid for the servers, set up the tournaments, advertised the game. One of the players, Migo, literally rewrote the server client code. They had already been on their own.
We've had to do a lot of that on our own and finance stuff like that on our own, and that's proved to be really challenging because the game's not really marketable.
They had a genuine, deep love and care for this game. So seeing the developer drastically change the game's future, a future that he didn't even want to be a part of, well, they understandably got concerned. A concern that Cryptic just didn't really seem to share. Obviously that doesn't justify toxicity, nothing ever does, but it does make the whole thing complicated. After this incident, Alex pumped out maybe a couple more updates, but only for the version that he was going with. The community, of course, refused them, sticking with patch 0.55, the version before the engine change. Come the end of 2016, Alex was done developing HQM for good. HQM's name disappeared from his website and his Twitter, and he's scarcely even talked about the game since. My first question for Dial, after learning about all this, was if the community had tried developing their own proper version of the game. Turns out that that was a bit harder than it looked.
Some people have tried that. We've had, probably like 5 or 6 people now that have come in and tried to do something like that, and the vast majority of them have been unsuccessful at creating something that is playable.
And CrypticSea, unfortunately, had absolutely no intentions of selling the game or releasing the source code. Whether this was because of his disdain for the community, or the fact that the code was some kind of prototype for SubRosa, we'll never know, but the likely truth is that it's a bit of both. So the game is no longer being supported, the developer actively wants it to be forgotten, the source code is never coming out, and the game is never going to be able to perform any kind of advertising because the developer still owns the game and holds the rights. Things were looking very bleak for HockeyQuestionMark, so in a last-ditch effort to save the game's future, Dial wrote a 3-page letter to Alex. It was a sincere, from-the-heart letter talking about how much the game meant to him and the community, how grateful they were for his work, apologies for their interactions in the past, a showcase of all they had managed to achieve, and how they'd wish he'd come back to be a part of it, both for the community's sake and his. After a few weeks, there was no response. The community asked Winters, Alex's community manager, if he could talk to Alex and see if he read the letter. When confronted, Alex simply responded with, "I read it." That's all he said. "I read it" quickly became a meme in the HockeyQuestionMark community, as if the phrase itself was the decisive truth that they were on their own. But that is not the end of this game's story. Because it was at this point that I learnt about a crucial piece of information. HockeyQuestionMark had a co-developer, and his name was Luke. And only 6 months ago, he reached out to the community offering to help develop a new version of the game.
He, out of nowhere, unprompted, sent us a message on the subreddit. Said, "Hey, this is Luke. I was one of the guys that made hockey, and, I wanted to see, I'm thinking about trying to do some more with the game." Yeah, they all hit me up like, "Is this real? Is this guy f***ing with us? What the f*** is this, man?" I'm like, "No, I think it's real. I think it's really Luke."
And in those 6 months, he, along with Payne Retsky, another important member of the HQM community, had begun development of a new stage in HQM's life. All of a sudden, this game's future isn't looking so dire anymore. It might finally have the developer support it's been looking for since the start. But as for me, I now had 2 people who I needed to learn more about. I wanted to understand Alex Austin's decisions more and his development philosophies, but I also wanted to know more about Luke and what brought him back to wanting to work on this old forgotten hockey game. Luckily, my next interview would answer nearly all of my questions because it was with Winters. As I mentioned, Winters was Cryptic's community manager while he was working on both HockeyQuestionMark and SubRosa, meaning he knew both Alex and Luke personally throughout their development careers. He had insights on the game's history that I wouldn't have been able to find anywhere else.
So they surrounded him with cronies, and I was the last one he was communicative with.
Winters reached out to me soon after I messaged the HockeyQuestionMark Discord, telling me that he had some truths for me, being someone who's been here since the beginning. We started by talking about his own history with HockeyQuestionMark and its community, how he's casted their tournament games since the very start, and helped found Friday Night Hockey, the very first HQM league. Winters stood at a very interesting middle ground on the whole conflict surrounding HQM. He was the one representing Alex as his community manager throughout the whole thing, and because of such, he was on complicated terms with the community. Winters was also on complicated terms with Alex though, for reasons we'll go into soon, but this meant that he had a really interesting perspective to hear.
It's not their fault. They already arrived at the conclusion about Alex years ago that I'm just now like, oh yeah, that's why they're not sympathetic. I don't expect them to be.
Before talking about Alex though, I wanted to learn more about Luke. From speaking with Winters, I learned that Luke was actually much more than just a co-developer. Luke had worked with Alex for nearly his entire development career, and the two are actually good friends. They began working on HockeyQuestionMark in an IGN office space in Florida, where they host indie game developers and sponsor them, kinda like a streamer house, but for game developers. IGN was hosting a game jam, and since they were both fans of hockey, that's how they decided to make HQM. From there, the story is what we already know. Friday Night Hockey starts, the LHL gets made, Alex makes patch 0.59, chaos ensues, and the game gets abandoned. Oh, and just in case you thought the whole thing with Alex Austin hating this game was exaggerated, just listen to this.
This one kid, he says, hey man, Tell Alex I'll give him $1,000 for an hour of his time. That's all I want. If he'll just talk to me for like an hour, I made sure to do so in front of the Devolver guys because I knew they'd give him shit about saying no, and he did, and they did.
Right. Right. Oh, wow.
Come on, man.
Yeah.
How bad can it be?
1,000 big ones to talk about the game for an hour, but Cryptic wanted nothing to do with it. He was done with HQM for good, but it's here where Alex and Luke begin to differ. Luke wanted to continue developing for HQM. Seeing that Alex had no care for the game, he offered to buy the game out.
Luke wanted to buy out hockey from Alex.
Okay.
Alex agreed verbally, which shocked me. I thought he'd never do that in a million years. But when presented with the paperwork, he again, I'm not going to say too much, but set a very different tune, and in what I felt was a very dismissive and mean tone towards not only Luke, his friend of a decade and a half, but also to anybody who would dare try to code up to his standard of skill.
Okay, I see.
Because they can do it. They can't do it.
Cryptic wasn't willing to let the game go, even if it meant selling it to his friend. Regardless though, Luke would continue working with Alex as he began developing SubRosa. However, at some point early in development, Luke left the project. Alex, however, finally got to make and release the game that he actually cared for. This was it. This was the project that was essentially the reason he disregarded HQM in the first place. So how did it go? Well, initially, it was doing great. The concept was cool and innovative, YouTubers were playing the game all over, the initial reviews were great, it had a ton of promise. But as I started digging deeper, and as I spoke more with Winters and a couple others who were involved, I started to get a chilling sense of deja vu. At some point, updates just weren't rolling out as frequently as they were promised. So people start getting upset and asking for the content they paid for. But Alex just wasn't updating the game. In fact, he even started working on other projects, and as you could expect, the community was not very happy.
You have to look at it from the perspective of you're making this thing, right? And everybody's just telling you that you suck, and you're bald, and you're stupid.
Finally, Alex releases a big patch that's expected to solve things, but it flops. Many call the patch a downgrade, chaos ensues, more hateful words get traded, and Alex gets burnt out. As a result, at this time, it's unclear if Alex ever plans to return to SubRosa, but the odds aren't looking great. Alex seems to have moved on to an entirely different game, and Devolver Digital has pulled support for the project. Patch 0.59 happened all over again. But how? How did history almost identically repeat itself? Well, in my interview with Winters, he talked more about what it was like working with CrypticSea. In Winters' own words, Cryptic did not like working with people. In many ways, he was enigmatic, a clearly remarkably talented developer who seemed entirely uninterested in accommodating his own communities and sometimes even his own fellow peers.
Yeah, we were on pretty good terms, Alex. He's not a jerk. He's just, I don't know, you ever been around... You ever worked in a shop with guys with really good kung fu, as far as tech goes? You know what I'm saying? The code monkeys. They're not always super duper people skills guys. They can work the shit out of a code problem, but
And sadly, this is what was making SubRosa suffer.
For a while, the SubRosa team was as good as it was like the Avengers of indie game, Brendan Chung from Blendo Games, all these people that, were really hot at human beings and some of the nicest people too, on top of being talented. But then over time, they all either got ghosted or they dropped off. And I was the last of them.
Winters, being Cryptic's community manager, had to deal with the SubRosa community, Devolver Digital, and Cryptic's absence as well. And it was at that point that he decided to stop working with Alex.
My 10 years dealing with Alex Austin and CrypticSea are pretty much finito.
I asked Winters if there was any chance Alex would be willing to do an interview with me, but he said that it probably would never happen. And yeah, since the date of this recording, I've yet to hear back from Cryptic, which is a shame because while he's made a lot of mistakes, being an indie developer is hard, and I do want to hear his end of the story. But almost ironically, the downfall happening to SubRosa might not happen to HQM. Because as I mentioned earlier, just under a year ago, Luke reached out to the HQM community, hoping to create a new iteration of the game. At some point earlier this year, Alex finally let him continue working on the project.
Alex gave Luke the go-ahead this past year to develop out the game more.
So I asked Winters if there was any chance that I could actually speak with Luke. So Winters reaches out to him for me, and after a few days, Luke gets back to me saying he'd be happy to talk. This was it, an interview with the co-developer of HockeyQuestionMark to finally answer all the remaining questions. This interview was a delight to have. Luke was super excited to talk about HQM and what he and Payne Retzky had planned for the game's future. I could also immediately tell that he was proud of the game.
It was either NVIDIA or Humble or one of those places. It was banned at the office because they were playing it too much.
Oh my goodness.
Which was kind of cool.
Has the community taken the technical and sort of like the skill ceiling of the game above what you expected?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah,
nice.
yeah. Some of the stuff that they're doing, like it's just amazing.
I also learned that apparently HockeyQuestionMark was inspired off of an image. This one here apparently, of a couple making out during a hockey game riot in Vancouver. Then Luke told me what his dream was for what the game could turn into.
My dream for it is to be like Rocket League, but have it be completely community based. We're making a new version where like everything can be changed, like all of the art assets can be easily replaced, and all of the, at least have multiple people have access to the code base.
Luke and Payne Retzky wanted to make a game that was fully accessible to the community, a game that was moddable, that could have customization, that was made for the players. Then Luke spoke about his time working with Alex, and to be honest with you, I didn't get the impression that the two were on any sort of bad terms. Now, of course, me being a person who wants to make a video about this story, I felt myself instinctively wanting to ask about the drama, about the juicy details of the conflict with the community and the troublesome development of SubRosa, but not only did Luke seem not really interested in going to those topics, but at some point, I realized that I shouldn't be either. HockeyQuestionMark was about to enter a new chapter, a better chapter. Why dwell on the previous one? I mean, the whole point of this happy ending that the game is coming upon, of all the work the community has done, is that HQM can finally move on from its turbulent history. Why should I try and bring up old crap that clearly needs to be left in the past? We continued having a lovely conversation about what the game could look like one day. Luke and Payne Retzky seemed thrilled to be a part of it. Their passion was clear, and for the first time, it felt like the game and its community were in good hands.
Just everything surrounding it, the way it's all been built up, the way we all got here and sort of found each other is something that I don't think I will ever experience again.
And that's the big takeaway of all of this for me, is that this community kind of is going to be able to reap its own rewards for all the years that they put in. Everything you did, everything, it mattered for something.
I'd like to give a huge thank you to the entire HQM community for all the help that they gave me in the making of this video. In the description, you'll find a link to their subreddit where you can download the game and try it out. You should. It's free, it's super fun, and they're always happy to welcome new players. Finally, thank you for listening. This was easily the biggest video I've ever done, but it was a lot of fun to make. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking it and sharing it with a friend or two. It really goes a long way. Otherwise, I plan on making a lot more content like this, so subscribe if you're into that. Hope you're having a good summer, and see you next time.